Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Thriving Relationship Show. I am your host, Christine Earthhart, founder of the Center for Thriving Relationships. And I am so grateful and excited to have you here and to get to support you in experiencing more love, connection, understanding, and peace in your relationship. And if you are someone who has ever felt confused or overwhelmed or consumed by relationship anxiety, by doubts and worries, by wondering whether or not your partner is the one, today's episode is going to be medicine for your heart and mind and spirit. And I'm so honored to get to introduce you all to Sarah Yudkin. Sarah is a relationship anxiety coach. This is her specialty. And it's her mission to help you feel confident to go all in on your loving, healthy relationship. After feeling anxious in her own relationship for years and finally going on a quest to understand why that was, she now feels more confident and fulfilled in her relationship than ever before. She has supported hundreds of thousands of people on their journey to heal relationship anxiety. You can find her on social media at You Love and You Learn. And I'm so excited to have you here. Welcome, Sarah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Christine, for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Your work just feels so incredibly important. Brett and I have been together 20 years now. And sometimes people will ask me, especially when they're having their own doubts, like, have you always known? And I'm like, oh my goodness, there were so many moments where I questioned whether or not he was the one. Like, can we really live our greatest life together? Are we too incompatible? All the things. And, we see couples for premarital coaching and counseling, and that really can stir up so much anxiety. Like, I'm about to marry this person and I'm having all these doubts. And does doubt mean we're just not meant to be? So this is so common. And I am just so grateful that you chose this as your area of expertise, because I feel like it is so healing and can help alleviate so many myths, so many misunderstandings, so much disconnection, so much pain. And so I just really am deeply grateful. And when I discovered your work, I'm like, well, you have to, I had to reach out to you to see if you would honor and bless us all by being here on the podcast. So thank you so much, and would love to hear more about so many things, but let's hear, for starters, how did you feel inspired to get into this work?
Well, thank you. I appreciate hearing your reflections on just how normal this experience can be. And that's really what I'm hoping to do, is normalize something that to me was extremely normal, but I never heard many others, bringing to light. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. And I think, like many people, I stumbled into this based on my own experience, and I've been with my boyfriend, Nate, for 6 years now, but didn't always think I would make it to 6 years or beyond that. And, didn't think I would be excited about a future at one point because I was so riddled with anxiety and doubt. And those thoughts for me looked like a little bit what you said earlier. How do I know he's the one? How can I be sure? My inner perfectionist was kind of rearing her head. How can I be 100% sure he's the one? And how can I guarantee that I'm making the right choice? And, I heard people saying things like, when you know, and just, I didn't understand that. I was like, what do you know? How do you know it? I need to understand what you're understanding, because it just felt all so confusing and big and just overwhelming for me. And my parents, love both of them, ended up getting a divorce in the last 8 to 10 years. And so I was old enough to really understand that love doesn't always work out. And of course, you hear the statistics on divorce. I don't know exactly how accurate all that is, but you hear numbers like 50%, and it feels scary to think that that's 1 out of every 2 couples potentially. So I'm a very introspective person, and that all really got to me and led me through my own kind of dark night of the soul, if you will, with my anxiety. And I guess that's the first piece of the story. So before I continue, is there anything you want to add to that before I share how I then pivoted into this work?
Oh, I just think, it's so good. No, keep going. It's
Awesome.
Thank you so much for sharing so openly about your journey and that dark night of the soul. I think that's what it can feel like. And so that is so powerful, what you are bringing to the light for people, so they don't feel alone or don't misinterpret, what can arise in these moments.
Yeah. So when I was in kind of that thick of the most extreme anxiety. It was during the pandemic, the world was changing rapidly. I was put on furlough from my job. So I had a lot of free time, a lot of time to ruminate, a lot of time to ponder. Nate and I moved in together for the first time, and there was a lot of stress going on in the world, that puts it lightly. And so a lot of these anxieties felt even stronger and more pertinent and more important to me to sort through. And I'm not proud to share that this is necessarily what happened, but ultimately it led to me having a breakdown and kind of just really telling Nate exactly what I was feeling. I had kind of alluded to the fact of, I'm scared that our relationship might not work, or, how do we know we're making the right choice? I'd kind of broached the subject, but one day in the middle of summer 2020, I was like, I'm not sure I even love you in the same way anymore. And it just came to this almost like volcano exploding of emotion. And in that moment, Nate, being the person he is, was so supportive, so compassionate, did not take it at all personally, and really just talked me through it. And the way he showed up for me in that moment was such love, such care, such empathy. And it was just everything I knew I wanted in a partner and knew that he was all along. But it kind of smacked me in the face in that moment. I was like, what am I doing here? And that was kind of the epiphany that led me to realize, like, this isn't about him, let's kind of change courses and figure out what's going on. So that's kind of what led me to this work. And then similar to your story, I read more kind of about how you and Brett got into this, just like fully immersing myself into experts on relationships and getting mentored and going through my own therapy and just trying to learn as much as I can to open and expand my view on love and relationships, because everything was so limited and I was seeing so narrowly.
Oh, wow, Sarah. Well, congratulations to you and Nate on like turning, the anxiety, the fears, the doubts into like such a catalyst to create this powerful conscious relationship of choosing each other on a whole nother level. And I love that you just speak to like the power of the questions when we don't judge them or just ruminate on them, or bury them, whatever it might be, like that you just openly shared them with Nate. So like by us just embracing them or sharing them openly and or sharing them with our partner, like that actually can become the pathway, through them and out of them and into this deepened love and connection. So it's such an incredible story of that. So thank you so much for sharing. And you kind of pointed out in your own story of what it can look like. Anything you want to add? So if people are tuning in and they're wondering, like, I don't know, do I have this? What are some of the most common ways you see kind of relation anxiety show up? So acknowledge, of course, like, are they the right one for me? But if you can name some of the others, that can be helpful.
Yeah. So, common questions can be, am I in love enough? Or, am I attracted enough? Maybe the honeymoon phase, if you had experienced a honeymoon phase, maybe that feels like it's no longer there. And so you're wondering, well, shouldn't this be more exciting? I miss how things used to be. And you mentioned a question you had earlier on in your relationship was, how do I know if we're compatible? So maybe you notice, or you're hyper vigilant looking for potential red flags or deal breakers. Maybe you're really trying to tune into every single expert, what they say about relationships, and trying to make sure yours checks off the boxes. It's kind of this, unanswerable quest for an answer that really only you can give yourself, but you're kind of seeking it externally, and it feels like you're checking in with everyone but really yourself to actually decide if your relationship's good enough. So it's just a very disorienting and confusing place to be in. And I think hopefully just by sharing this story, even people might be able to acknowledge, oh, maybe I have experienced a little bit of that, because I think it's more common than we think. And I wish more people felt that they could talk about it openly, because when I talked about it openly, it actually was one of the biggest ways I set myself free, because I was no longer hiding from my own story.
Yes, yes, yes. So those are great, descriptions of all the different ways that it can show up for us. And how do you see it like impacts a relationship? When we just start to really have fears around all you named them so beautifully. What's the ripple impact?
Yeah. So the first thing that comes to mind is you don't feel present in the relationship because you're constantly thinking about what's going on, but not actually experiencing what's going on. So maybe you're out on date night, but then a thought pops up. And so then instead of actually having that meaningful time with your partner, it's kind of the course has turned a little bit and you're in your head. And then it's really hard to get out of that. And, I wish there were more tools that we all knew about that were just taught in elementary school of like how to soothe your anxiety 101. I think that was something that I really had to learn and I still am working on constantly because, our brain can just go in so many directions when we're afraid. So not being present, that's a big one. It can also lead to extra focus on what's missing or flaws or, nitpicking is kind of a term that comes up as well, and feeling like you are scanning for what isn't going right. And unfortunately, then unintentionally, as a defense mechanism, that can lead to lashing out towards the partner, even though what you're craving so badly is that love and connection. We kind of put up walls and distance ourselves. So, those are kind of the first two things that come to mind. And one other to throw in is like guilt for feeling that way. And so then that kind of cascades as well and affects how you're showing up.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. And I heard you saying too that, your own journey was about kind of sourcing guidance, wisdom, insight outside of yourself. And the shift happened when you started to look internally. And I can so relate to that, to my own journey, just seeing like, how our different blueprints around love and relationships, or how we relate to ourselves and how we can project that onto our partner. I mean, it's such a fascinating mirror and like spiritual journey being in relationship. And could you speak more? Like, what was that shift for you? What's the difference between looking outside versus like, how do we begin the quest in your own perspective?
Yeah. And I want to acknowledge too that, part of the journey may be starting to look externally first before you realize that that won't help you. So, I mean, I won't deny that it was really helpful to hear from some experts or learn more about what other people thought. And then ultimately realizing that there was clashing information. And so I had to choose, what actually felt true for me. But I think the biggest aha moment for me was actually making a decision. And I forget like where this even comes from, but just the Latin root of the word. I don't know who originally started talking about this, but how those two pieces of the word mean cut off. And that's what the Latin root of decide is. So cut off other options. So that was the biggest shift for me when I actually decided that through the ups and downs, through the doubts, through everything, like I decide I want to be in this relationship. And that decision I am in control over. Versus, what if I find someone better? What if it doesn't work? It's, all these what ifs that lead you to actually then feeling one foot in and one foot out, but deciding was actually me taking my power back. And that I think was the biggest thing that I can recommend anyone to do. And I can't just, even if I say that once, it's not going to mean tomorrow you can just make that decision, but through your own journey, coming to a decision and then actually sticking with that and knowing that, of course, decisions can change, but with the information you have in front of you, deciding and then just trusting in that decision. Because the back and forth, should I stay? Should I go? Do I love them? Do I not? That's the really exhausting piece of relationship anxiety.
Yes, it really is that power of committing. And I just think it's really that moment, because I think so often, like, there's so many paths, right? We could all take, whether it's with our career or where we live or who we choose as our friend group. There's so many paths we could probably take, and by not choosing any of them, we like miss out on all of them. And I remember when I heard some things like on our earlier years, when I was really like, okay, is this really, wanting so much to be on like my greatest path, and there's a part of questioning things I found that like allows us to choose our partner in our life even more. And that I realized, like, oh, these are the same kind of thoughts I'm having about other areas of my life too. And then it's like it really prevents us from being fully present to whatever we choose. And instead, you realize like compatibility is created, or having a thriving relationship. It isn't something like, it's about finding the right person out there. It really is something that we create. And that's so liberating. And the only way we can create those things, create compatibility, create attraction, create the spark, is through really committing and going all in. Like, we're not going to experience those things if we're so innocently in that space of questioning and wondering. So that's really a powerful takeaway and invitation for people when you're ready, and at least to commit, right, to like diving in and seeing what's really possible there in the relationship. So
Definitely.
I love that, Sarah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I've actually found it's pretty counterintuitive, because most people think, well, if I go all in, then that's when something bad can happen, or that's why I want to have a backup plan, or, if I'm not all in, then I can't get as hurt. But you're also getting hurt by not going all in, because you're not actually giving it a fair chance. And so then you're hurting because of the indecisiveness. And so it is hard. So I don't want to just gloss over that fact that it does take a lot of, trust and intentional like work to actually make that decision. But for me, it's actually gave me more freedom, not more restriction.
What an amazing irony in relationships. So yeah, thank you. So highlight and underline that that by committing, you can actually feel freer and lighter, and it really opens up more possibilities by really going all in. So that's such a wonderful thing to really point out to people. And I'm curious, Sarah, what is your sense about like, where does this come from? Like, why are maybe some people are more prone to these questions and to relationship anxiety than others, and why?
Yeah. I loved the word you used earlier, the blueprint. I think that that's really powerful. I've said that before in my client sessions as well, of just what's your unique blueprint that led you to this place. And for me, I do think that there are certain patterns, but I will also say that sometimes you can be on opposite sides of the coin. So I'll explain what I mean by that. So, for example, people with divorced parents, I've noticed, can have a fear, but then also people who have had parents in a perfect relationship, I've noticed that they can have the fear of not living up to that. So that's what I mean when I say you can be on the opposite sides of the coin. I really do think it's about just personality, like, are you sensitive? Are you the type of person that really seeks answers from other people? Do you want to do the right thing? Do you want to be good? Do you want to, be perfect? Do you want to succeed? And some of these answers, most people might say, of course I do. But if you have the extreme form of it, like, I have to make the right choices, I can't fail, I'm scared to mess up my life, and it really becomes paralyzing. So I think some of the most sensitive and sweet, loving souls end up, unfortunately, experiencing relationship anxiety. And that's because, unfortunately, they get in their own way of just doing the thing, and they let all of kind of the what ifs take over. So it's some of those characteristics of like a more sensitive, driven, perfectionist minded person that has taken in a lot of beliefs around love and relationships. That's another piece, and taken those to heart. So my relationship should look like the movies if it's going to be good. And if it's not like that, then maybe I'm doing something wrong. So that's like some of the patterns I've noticed, but I'm sure there's more stuff I could think of if we keep talking about this, because it is a question I ask myself often.
Those are wonderful insights. And I love just that acknowledgement for those of you out there that can relate to this, to realize like, oh, they're like beautiful strengths, that are oftentimes underneath this kind of sensitivity and loving and caring and driven and all those things. So that's so lovely. And you mentioned, sorry, so this blueprint and the different places we're influenced. And I'm curious your perspective about the influence of social media and romantic comedies. And we grew up, right, watching these cartoons where there's almost always a love story. I love the love story. And I'm also aware that it has impact. So yeah, I'd love to hear your reflections on that.
Yeah, I would say I've gone through an interesting arc where on one end of the arc, I loved rom-coms and I loved, the relationship goals, but it was making me really anxious. And then I kind of dipped down into, oh, wait, this like a jaded perspective, like this isn't real. This is, why do we have these things? And now I'm in a more neutral place. I've kind of completed the arc where I'm back to enjoying those, but I have a new perspective, which is, okay, this isn't real. This is a fictional rom-com. This is created because a good story is what people want to see, but you only have a limited view into that. And the same thing goes with social media. So whether it's a relationship picture or you're seeing, a lot of videos or you just get certain narratives about a couple, I'm not saying there's terrible stuff happening in the background, but you just don't see the full story. And it's kind of like when you ride off at the end of the movie into the sunset, what happens next? We don't get to see that. And it's kind of the same thing with social media, where even on my page, I try to be super transparent about what's going on with me and Nate, but I'm not telling them every single thing. And no one will ever know exactly what it's like to be in our relationship, even our probably closest family and friends. So just remembering that the energy you use to compare yourself to others on social is always going to be a little bit, you know, negatively impacting you because you're looking at the best parts of them. And then you're probably comparing it to the not so best parts of your own situation. And then it feels like this huge, unsurmountable gap.
Yeah, that right there, those two comparisons, it's such an easy, innocent, trap to fall into and can really skew our perspective in a way that causes so much pain. So thanks for that. And let's look at some of these questions. So if someone's having a question, let's take, am I attracted to my partner enough? How would you guide someone, one of your clients or someone in your group coaching programs, when they're having that particular question?
Yeah.
And that was one that comes up a lot, when we're working with couples. And so rest assured, if you're out there and you're having this question, totally normal. And Sarah, I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah. So I like to start by trying to help someone define terms kind of in their own words. So, what does attraction mean to you? When you say you're not attracted enough, what are you expecting out of attraction? And like, what does that word bring out in you, I guess? And most times people will say, like, like I felt in the honeymoon stage, like I have the butterflies and the butterflies are supposed to be there all day, every day. And, they usually start kind of explaining some of these things. And I try to just let them say as much as they can on the topic. And we usually kind of from there together try to parse out what feels like a true expectation that they want to hold on to and what feels a little bit of that perfectionist mindset that I mentioned. And usually they can kind of see clearly when the perfectionist is coming in. And that helps, but I think there's, of course, more to it than them recognizing that maybe their beliefs are a little bit skewed. And it's about myth busting some of the things they've heard and helping them feel normal that what they're experiencing is, not completely out of the ordinary, which a lot of times is surprising because most people think that in the movies, that's the only way you should be attracted or not to your partner. And then I usually spend some time helping them redefine what attraction could look like for them, where it feels like a more middle ground version. So instead of I'm never attracted to my partner, compared with I should be always attracted to my partner and fully lusting and all of that, where's that middle ground where you feel content with that, but you're not, feeling, disappointed or like, oh, I don't have any sort of attraction. It's like, okay, well, can we find some ways that you're attracted, or what initially drew you to your partner? How can we bring more of that into your view and more appreciation for those things that maybe have fallen to the wayside? So I think it's kind of looking at like where their expectations may have gone astray, normalizing that, and then coming up with a new definition or expectations that feel a little bit more helpful all around.
Oh, that's so good. I just imagine people out there who have experienced this. It is like just the message that is kind of the myth busting from those other things that we've been told. And so let's look at what are some of the common myths that you think are out there, whether it's on social media, in these romantic comedies, or just that are on magazines or are talked about in friend groups, and it's all we know or we grew up with. What are some of the most common ones? And feel free to do some of the myth busting as you go along.
Yeah, I would say one that I kind of just alluded to is that you should feel in love 24/7, and then also you should feel the same levels of in love as the very first moment that you met 24/7. And so doesn't take into account like the chemicals in our body, like the dopamine and all of that that's firing when you first newly meet somebody. And our body is actually different when we first meet our lover or partner than later on in our time together. And of course, there's new chemicals, more appreciative, like oxytocin, serotonin, like the more cozy, loving chemicals that come in. But there are quite literally different chemicals firing in our brain at different stages in the relationship. So just knowing that that doesn't mean you're doing something wrong or that your partner's doing something wrong or that they're not good. It just means that something has evolved and changed. So I think that one really triggers a lot of people. A lot of people report or experience relationship anxiety right after that honeymoon phase kind of fizzles a little bit and they're kind of reaching that new stage of a relationship. So that's a big one that comes up a lot. Another one that I would say is a pretty big myth is that your partner should make you happy. So if you're unhappy, then it must be because your partner's not doing enough for you, or, also it abdicates responsibility on your end to kind of continue fulfilling yourself. So I think a lot of times what I end up finding with private clients is they come to me because their relationship isn't, great or whatever their anxiety is telling them. And then they realize, ooh, I haven't been taking very good care of my mind, body, and spirit over the last however many months or years in this relationship. And I feel like I'm disconnected from myself. And now I'm projecting that onto my partner and making them responsible. So those are two big ones. And there's other ones that I could share too, but I saw you really resonating with that last piece. So
I think these are so important. Actually, I'd love for you to share any others. I just hear these so much, in our work. Of course, people oftentimes reach out to us when they're in a difficult moment, but it's like the difficult moment is really exasperated when we add to it this expectation, that we're always going to feel completely in love with our partner, just completely smitten, lusting after them. And it's a different physiological experience in long-term love. And it takes really consciously nurturing and creating. And the good news is, rest assured, you can have, obviously you said your relationship is better than ever. I will say my relationship with Brett, I imagine, Sarah, we can both relate to this, like looking back on those moments of having doubts. And thank goodness, I know for me, like, thank goodness I didn't let it go. Like I would have missed out on the greatest gift of my entire lifetime. And I don't know if that's also something you can relate to, but I think this is so good. I think it's these myths that really just agitate the pain that we're already in, the questions we're already having is like, oh, then what these questions mean. So let's do some more myth busting.
Yeah, definitely. I love that addition. And one other one that comes to mind is about if you disagree or have arguments, then that's not good. And I love the Gottman's perspective on this in their book, Eight Dates. And they say, like, happy couples are no different from unhappy couples in the amount that they argue, but happy couples repair more after their disagreements or arguments. And so, I know so many people that feel really overwhelmed at any single argument, or this must mean we're not meant to be. This must mean we're incompatible. Um, just any number of thoughts. And of course, after a disagreement, this still happens to me at times. You don't feel great, like it's not necessarily a time when you're feeling the best about everything in the relationship. And you do want to make those repairs, of course. But if every single time there's a disagreement, your immediate thought is we shouldn't be here, then it's going to be a very tough path forward, just because if people are showing up authentically as themselves in the relationship, then there probably will be some disagreements because we're not with our clone and we're going to have slightly different opinions or slightly different ways of doing things. And that should be expected.
Yes. Yes. So just normalizing all these things. Conflict. I know I so appreciate Gottman's research, and even, that ratio of like, you want to aim for the 5-to-1 ratio or the 20-to-1 ratio of positive to negative interactions. And how he points out, we're not going for 20-to-0. Like that doesn't exist. And that would just mean a couple is really avoiding, out of fear, or any reason, avoiding, the more difficult conversations that are inevitable when you bring two completely unique human beings together to co-create, a life together. It's just like inevitable that we'll want different things in different moments. We'll have different perspectives and ideas, or we'll get tired and need to eat or whatever it might be. So normal. Wonderful, Sarah. Thank you so much. Any other of the myths that you wanted to share?
That kind of leads into another one, that you should be with someone who is exactly like you in order for things to work. And I don't necessarily think that there's one right or wrong way, of course. Like, people sometimes will say opposites attract, and then sometimes people will say be with someone who is more like you. And I think that it's, of course, whatever feels best for you. But I do think people get uncomfortable when their partner is different because it's challenging them to push themselves out of their comfort zone. And so I think that when personality differences feel triggering, or is this an incompatibility, sometimes we're too quick to judge it as an incompatibility versus thinking of how can I grow and learn and be more accepting of differences and kind of tolerate differences more in my life, not just in my relationships, but kind of in the world. And I think we can all use a little bit more of that. And I know it's easier said than done, but I think that's a big one as well. And I know that I've had to work a lot at this too, because I always want to be right. And unfortunately, a lot of humans, I think, tend to want to be right. So if you see a different perspective than your partner, you want one of them to be right and the other one to be wrong, but both of them are right in different ways. So I think that's an important one too.
Oh, that resonates so deeply. Everything you're saying, Sarah, and you say it in just like such an articulate way. That is so, so true. I think sometimes it's so easy in our relationships to maybe want someone that has all of our same strengths, but none of our challenges. Yeah. Because probably if we were in this relationship with someone exactly like us, it would be very humbling and saying also the reverse side of being in a relationship. I've always had that thought. So, it's such an invitation, isn't it, to be with someone who, who sees the world differently and has different preferences and strengths. And if we accept the invitation, it like really allows us to grow a part of ourselves. And you're so right that it's not always comfortable, which it's, why I just have had so many moments for my own journey, with Brad and with so many couples. It's like those choice points, when a difference comes up, it can either be such a place of pain if we like really resist it, versus like when we can really open up to it and see, sometimes I'll find that it's like, oh, it's just an outdated way that I've even been doing things, and it's
Mhm.
such a way to clear and update, even who we are by learning from our partner who balances us. Brett had this saying one time, he just said it, and I was like, that's a quotable, that we don't necessarily seek our opposite, but we seek our balance. Like, oh,
Mm.
yeah. So, but you're right. It can look lots of different ways.
That's beautiful. I love that, your balance. And I find that so true. The ways that I am, maybe leaning one way, Nate usually is more neutral. And I mean, in the story I shared earlier about when I was professing how I wasn't sure I felt the same, if roles were reversed, I don't think I would have been able to respond the way Nate did. And that's the beauty of him, but also the beauty of me is like I just feel deeply and I think a lot. And sometimes I have to go to him to be a little bit more of that steady ship. And I joke with my clients sometimes not to bring them any sort of shame, but just to, get a chuckle of like, imagine dating yourself, it's like that would be for me a lot of feelings, a lot of, like what ifs. And, whereas Nate, he's a little bit more able to balance me out, like you said. So sometimes when you picture it that way, you're like, oh, it is kind of good. My partner has their own unique take on things.
Yeah, I love that. And if you're comfortable sharing, like, how is this for Nate? Anything you want to say from that perspective? Knowing Nate's journey, I imagine a bit, and if anybody that's tuning in and they are maybe with someone who, experiences a lot of relationship anxiety, or they are the one who does and is wondering kind of how this might impact their partner. Anything you want to share about insights he's had or how it's been for him to kind of hold space for you during the journey, if you're comfortable doing so.
Yeah, of course. I think the interesting piece about this is there isn't one right way to respond to that type of thing. And like I shared, I don't think I would have been very comfortable supporting someone with relationship anxiety, just knowing my personality. And that's just me being really honest. So if someone shared with their partner that they were having anxiety, or if they had anxiety and they were really looking for that support from a partner, it also is very dependent on who that person is. And so I think it can be hard for me to share my story sometimes because I know that's not going to be everyone's experience if they open up and share anxiety with a partner. Many of my clients have been with a partner who is that way and really is just not taking it personally. That's what Nate, did. He didn't take it personally. He was just like, this is your thing and I support you. And obviously, I hope that it works out with us. But like, obviously, I can't control it. And so I'll just be here. But I just know how hard that is to do. So I really admire him. And that was, again, a huge aha moment for me of, wow, this is someone that is so empathetic and supportive. So appreciating that in him, but not judging if someone else's partner is unable to do the same, I think is a big note that I want to add into this conversation. And I do have a blog post called Telling Your Partner About Relationship Anxiety on my website. And I have a script in there and people can customize it, of course, to their needs, but it's a little bit more of a self-focused way to kind of open up to your partner and take the focus off of them and put it on more of you, your own fears, because relationship anxiety is focused on your partner in the mind, but in reality, it's probably due to your own fears around love and relationships. So we think, oh, well, my partner did this. That's why I'm anxious. But really, we're just scared that what if we break up in the future? And what if I made the wrong choice? What if this fails? Like, am I good enough at making choices? Can I handle this? And of course, I can't speak for everybody, but that was my experience. That's been the experience of so many of my clients and community members, realizing this isn't really about my partner. This is about something so much bigger. But my partner is that mirror that reflects this anxiety back to me. So I'll end with that as far as your question goes. But I think that however your partner responds, that's just based on their unique blueprint and their own beliefs around love and, not judging their reaction as something about you, even though it feels like it is. So yeah, it's hard.
Oh, no, that's so beautiful. I mean, just deeply honor Nate for how he chose to show up, and what an opportunity for you to get to really see that part of him shine, like such perfection in that. And it's so understandable that people could respond in a whole variety of ways. And I love that you have that tool on your website. What an incredible offering. So why don't we kind of share your website and how they could find that particular blog post? Because I'm sure there are people that are going to want to check that out, and just to know how to share it in a way that their partner can best receive it. And also it just kind of creates the context for how to start navigating and exploring, one's own relationship anxiety kind of from the inside out in some ways. So yeah, how would they find that blog post?
Yeah, so it's on my website, youloveandyoulearn.com, and I have a blog section. And I am making website updates in the future, so things will be a little bit more searchable. But if you Google telling your partner about relationship anxiety, you love and you learn, it pops up. So it shouldn't be too hard to find, but I have, yeah, on my website, over 100 free blog posts and a free video training just to help you, sink your toes into the world of relationship anxiety if you're first hearing about this or you are trying to understand it more. And then I do have other ways that people can get support from me if they're looking to dive into more deeply understanding why relationship anxiety happens and how to move through it. Because, of course, that's one of my biggest passions now, is making sure that people don't feel as alone as I did when I was in that moment crying to Nate and just feeling so isolated, like I was doing something wrong, and just all of these shame-based feelings. And luckily now I've been able to get the message out to so many people and feel really validated in the need for this message, because at first it was 100 people. Now, between all of my social channels, it's over 200,000 people that are resonating with this. And for me, that number is only most exciting because that many people need to hear about relationship anxiety, and that many people had never really been able to understand it perhaps until coming across some of this work. So yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sarah. We'll be sure to put your website, of course, and your social channels in the show notes below. So everyone be sure to check those out to find it directly. And I love the little search that you let us know that we could do to find it. So that's a great place to start. Certainly checking out Sarah's amazing work and following her on social and looking for this blog post and how you could have the conversation. But what are other kind of first steps? So someone, if they're listening right now and they're like, oh my goodness, that's totally me. I have all these questions and I am wondering, like, is my partner the one? Do I love them enough? Like, what would you, suggest is a good pathway forward for some of those first steps someone can start taking?
Yeah, it's such a good question. There's so many different directions people can kind of go in. And so it's always hard to just kind of pick a couple. But I would say this might surprise you in one of my answers, but really strengthening your ability to soothe moments of anxiety. So finding some body-based somatic practice, whether it's your breath, whether it's walking outside, whether it is shaking out the energy in your body, whether it's even having a good cry, but like allowing yourself to do that. But figuring out ways to kind of neutralize your levels of anxiety is kind of a really good journey to go on. And that kind of is separate from the world of relationship anxiety. It's just a great tool for anybody to have. But I think that oftentimes we jump straight into trying to think our way out of it or like rationalize our way out of it. But really, we need to kind of tune into our most present, grounded self, because I don't know about you, but for me, in my doubtful moments, I was just too overwhelmed to actually clearly see the relationship. But when I was feeling the most grounded or open-hearted or loving and just kind of settled in my own self, then I was able to look at my partner with more love and more clarity. And so that's kind of a first initial thing I would recommend. And that's something that I definitely share with my clients, and I try to remind people on social as much as I can just to connect back to the present moment versus kind of all of these what ifs in the future. So that would be an important note. And then another thing I would do is try to not try to not seek answers necessarily, but start getting curious about that blueprint that we started talking about. So, what were your past experiences in relationships like? Journal about that. What did your parents or caretakers tell you about love and relationships? Were there any messages? Did you see anything when you grew up? What is your favorite rom-com if you have one? And what did you take away from that? What are, some of your beliefs about what it means to be a good partner? What does it mean to have a good partner? What are they supposed to do? What does it mean to be in a healthy relationship? Like just starting to kind of unpack some of the answers to these expectations and starting to more clearly see, like, oh, okay, this is how I'm operating when it comes to relationships. This is what I expect. This is what I believe to be true. And not necessarily trying to change it or anything, but just bringing it into your awareness, because that was a huge piece for me. And until I could come to terms with all of these expectations and beliefs and stories I was creating about love and relationships, it was really hard to assess if I wanted to change that. And so those two answers are, I would say, the very basics, but I feel like those are attainable for anyone listening. And if you pair those things together, then it could actually be really powerful when you're in that clear-headed, more grounded place. And then taking a look at some of these things that might have led you to where you're at, it can be a really powerful way to build awareness in yourself and in your relationship.
Those are so good. Yeah. So developing an ability, kind of really building that muscle to be able to be present and grounded in the moment. So we're not, going into the possibility of what could go wrong or whatever it might, to really be using somatic practices. I love that. Yes, yes, yes to that. And then beginning to unpack and explore and just bringing kind of the unconscious into the light, into our consciousness, to see like all the different things that are influencing, how we see our partner and what among those are serving us, what are expectations that we're not even realizing we have, that, are kind of setting ourselves up for continual disappointment or frustration or pain, whatever it might be. So I'm just looking at all those from all those different angles. So I love that. That is such a powerful invitation for everyone. Thank you so much, Sarah. So what else, if what would be any other messages that you would have to anyone who is experiencing relationship anxiety or loves someone who is? Any other words of wisdom or things that you found to be really important for us to recognize?
I would share that, especially for someone with relationship anxiety, I'll speak to them because I don't have actually the insight of being a partner with relationship anxiety. So I think that is less powerful when I speak to that person, just because it wasn't my direct experience. But for those with relationship anxiety, just a message that you're not broken, you're not a bad person. This isn't your fault. It's not something to blame yourself for, judge yourself for, to feel guilty over. I know how it goes, and I know that is some of what you are feeling right now. But when you can neutralize relationship anxiety, not as bad or wrong, but just as a thing, as your response to something that is scary. And love is actually way scarier than it's been made out to be. There's things that can go wrong and you don't have a guarantee. And, especially if you've had traumatic experiences with love in the past, it's stored in your body. That love can be risky. So just know that relationship anxiety is a protective mechanism that you're doing to try and keep yourself safe. And so if you can actually befriend it a little bit and just be a little bit kinder to the anxiety because it's trying to protect you. I know that's sometimes hard to wrap our head around, but our body is doing something to try and help us, even when sometimes it's taking it too far. So just trying to make a little bit more peace with yourself and giving yourself a little bit of compassion and normalizing your experience. And maybe today was the first time you heard about it, so it's hard to normalize something that you've never heard anyone talking about. But maybe taking a look at other people's thoughts on this. There's myself, there's other people that are starting to speak out about this too. And just knowing that there are people out there in your shoes, and just give yourself a little bit of a break, cut yourself some slack.
How kind and compassionate and caring, and befriending this part of ourselves. I just believe in that with every bit of my being, because there's usually always, there is like some precious need underneath the anxiety, just like you said, to protect ourselves. So there's just like, we have a need that we want to make sure we feel safe in our relationship, or that we want to experience a really incredible, deeply connected love with our partner, or whatever it might be, that we want to experience a lot of adventure together. Like underneath it, there's something so beautiful and precious. And there's another strategy for how we can really create that from within and in our dynamic, when we turn towards, whatever that is. Like that is totally where the treasure is. So thanks for just helping light the way and giving people that loving encouragement to turn towards it. And it's totally here to support us, without a doubt. So I love that, Sarah. And this is the Thriving Relationship Show. So I always love asking people, what would you say from your unique perspective and your passions and insights, that a thriving relationship is?
I've been really loving the word content lately, and I think it has a bad rep, but the definition of content is actually peaceful happiness. And I think that's really beautiful. And so I think a thriving relationship is one where, even through the mundane moments and through the ups and the downs, the highs and the lows, and, the hardships, but also the really great times, you can find a way to go back to a center or a central place of feeling content, and just trying to find moments of peaceful happiness as much as possible, but also knowing that that won't be how it feels 100% of the time.
Contentment. It feels so good just to say that word.
Yeah.
That is so lovely. Thank you so much, Sarah. And for people that want to learn more, I know you mentioned before, of course, youloveandyoulearn.com, but tell us all the different places, anything you have coming up. I'm sure they're going to be eager, and I just absolutely recommend. I'm on Instagram quite a bit, and we follow Sarah's wonderful work, and it's so good. So I enthusiastically recommend following along. You're so generous in sharing so many insights that I'm sure will just be so healing and validating and comforting and liberating and all the things for people. But yeah, tell us all the places. Where can we find you?
Oh, thank you so much, Christine. So I'm at You Love and You Learn on Instagram and TikTok. And then, as mentioned, my website is youloveandyoulearn.com. I have my podcast coming out, and I'm excited that Christine is actually going to be a guest episode on my podcast soon. So really excited about that. If you enjoyed this conversation, I hope you'll enjoy my podcast, and it's going to be the same name, You Love and You Learn. So look out for that on my website. You can keep up to date, and same with my Instagram, of kind of everything I have going on. I have some webinars that I do, a digital course, some group coaching and private coaching. So if this feels like something you really are wanting to explore and work on, and knowing that you're not broken, but if you'd like to grow in this place, then I'd be happy to help. So thank you so much, Christine, for having me. And it was a pleasure to just talk about this and hear a little bit more about your story as well, too.
You are such a beautiful spirit, Sarah. Thank you so, so much. And thank you all for tuning in. And I think just the more that we can understand these really normal parts of relationship, it frees us up really, so that we can awaken, to all the love that's just outstretched here and available and ready to be received by us. So cheers to love. And thank you all so much for multiplying it in the world, and so grateful. And Sarah, so many blessings on your new podcast. I'm so honored and delighted to get to be on it. And I'm sure it's going to be amazing, just like all the other things you do. So many blessings to you on the journey, and thanks and blessings to everyone. So much love.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Want more support for your relationship, or want to become trained as a certified relationship coach to help other couples? we warmly welcome you to head on over to centerthrive.com. Thank you so much, and I can't wait to see you next time on the Thriving Relationship Show.